pretend with me for a moment that you're a college professor. But not just any college professor, the kind of professor who opens their mouth and their colleagues do this. Right? Like maybe you think evolution is a bad theory, or that global climate change is a hoax, or in this case, that immigrants bring harmful diseases to our country, they destroy our environment, and they threaten our way of life. How do you spread your ideas? Not to your colleagues who are a bunch of intractable liberal academics. How do you spread your message to the people who really matter? To the public, and more importantly, to lawmakers. Tonight I'll tell you the story of how one college professor did just that to stop immigration reform, engaging in what I call nefarious invisibility. Nefarious invisibility is the way that bad actors take advantage of the structures we've built to hide their activities in plain sight, right under the noses of the people who should most object. So tonight my story is about this woman, Dr. Virginia Dean Abernathy. In 2012, she was the US vice presidential candidate for the American Third Position Party. That's a fringe political party founded by California skinheads to represent the political interests of white people. She's also on the board of the Occidental Quarterly, which is a journal that historian Tony Taylor describes as a far-right, racially obsessed US magazine, and that the Anti-Defamation League asserts is the primary publication promoting US anti-Semitism. Occidental Quarterly asserts that immigration to the United States should be restricted to selected people of European ancestry. The Anti-Defamation League calls Abernathy an unabashed white supremacist, and the Southern Poverty Law Center calls her a full-fledged professor of hate. In my writings, I call her an eco-fascist, but in fairness, she prefers the term ethnic separatist. In the 80s, Abernathy was a well-respected college professor with a PhD from Harvard on the psychiatry faculty at Vanderbilt. Her ideas on immigration were completely unsupported by any reasonable data, statistical analysis, or good modeling, but that's okay. That her ideas were hateful didn't matter because she had credentials. So what did she do? She became the editor of a journal, a good journal, published by Springer, the journal Population and Environment, which I'm going to call P&E for the rest of this talk. And it wasn't hard to become an editor because she looked good on paper. And then she filled her editorial board with respectable academics from the best schools, but then added guys like Herbert Woodward. Don't know who he is, but he owns a company that makes light switches, so he's totally qualified to evaluate research on the environment. He's also self-published some anti-immigrant rants and is financially plugged into a network of people that work to stop immigration reform. And she got buddies to write articles for the journal. I mean, her buddies weren't scholars, but they had some things to say, like how we need to protect the traditional language unity of the United States. And there was no worry that there was no research to back up their claims. Their work was guaranteed to get through peer review because Light Switch Guy was going to be the reviewer. And picking the right people to publish in the journal was easy. John Tanton, who died recently, was the single most powerful anti-immigrant activist in the United States. He was the major money behind all the anti-immigrant groups you see here, most of which are designated hate groups. Everyone in italics here was published by P&E while Abernathy was editor. Most weren't scholars. And then she published book reviews that supported her views even when all the other journals said the books were trash. A review in Reason said that Hardin's book shows he is curiously uncomfortable around empirical data and is reduced to making wild assertions that have no scientific justification. But P&E says it's a very balanced discussion. And then she created a column to appear in every issue and promoted it as a special section for correspondence and controversy. That way, she could get past the pesky peer review process and other journal norms like citations to pose important questions like, will Europe and North America be swamped by the far more prolific breeders of the third world? And why do all this? Well, if you want to spread a message that immigrants are bad for the environment, then a journal is a great space for it. I mean, we all know that if your work gets published in a top journal, then it must be better science than work that gets published in lesser journals. I'm sure I've heard that somewhere. But Stephanie, you say, nobody reads academic journals but other academics, and surely other academics know junk science when we see it. And how would scholars even see this work? We don't read journals from cover to cover. I'm going to read the paper on the projected cost of sea level rise, not 30 pages down the paper on how immigrants are solely responsible for LA smog. But see, the audience is not the point. The point's credibility. So going back to Occidental Quarterly, when their editor is challenged about the content of his publications, he's quick to point out that his editorial board members have PhDs, and they're all respected writers, because being published in a respected journal makes you a respected writer. See how that works? See, so when scholars from the Center for Immigration Studies, that's an anti-immigrant hate group trying to pass themselves off as a think tank, when they testify in front of Congress on immigration reform, they can say, don't just take our word for it that immigration is bad, it's written on the pages of some of our leading academic journals. See, we believe in what Jane Hill calls the folk theory of racism. We think that if people are racist, then they must be ignorant or backward. Some are, but some are really well educated and well connected. John Tanton used every tool, including the Sierra Club, to push his agenda by doing really smart and evil things. P&E was just another tool in his arsenal yielded by his good friend Abernathy. And this tool was yielded for 11 years and then another 5 under her self-selected successor, Kevin MacDonald, a psychology professor who thinks Jewish people are genetically driven to destroy Western society and who the Southern Poverty Law Center calls the neo-Nazi movement's favorite academic. But my story isn't a story about racists. It's a story about us. It's a story about what can happen when we put credentials over ideas, when we trust that everything in our journals has undergone rigorous scientific review by real scientists without a political agenda, and when we assume that our weird colleagues are harmless. They're not harmless, they're winning.